Hello and welcome, or welcome back to my channel. First and foremost, addressing the elephant in the room. I know the lighting is horrendous right now. I may or may not, I did, have broken my tripod a few days ago. So currently all I have until my new one comes tomorrow is my desk. So I'm currently using my camera and the little tripod that comes with it. And when I mean little, I mean it's literally like that big. And I've got those sat on my desk. So we make do with what we've got for now. Lighting aside though, I'd like to highlight, I am so comfy and cozy right now. I really like this. It is far more comfortable than the other chair I sometimes use, or specifically the little stepping stool I sometimes sit on. Look, now I know it's probably a bit late by the time you're seeing this. We're likely approaching the middle of June, but I thought it should be about time that we talk about the books that I read throughout the month of May, and also talk about the books that I plan on hopefully reading this month in June. Now, I know I usually do a TBR prompt jar video and I absolutely do love those. Last month though, and I did say this over on my TikTok, last month was a very, very busy month. So I think for this month, I was just really wanting to take it a little bit slower and I guess just read whatever books I was in the mood for. So I do have a few. I will very quickly go through those towards the end of the video. But rest assured, next month, the TBR prompt jar is absolutely coming back. As far as May reads go though, I think we have a relatively good mix. We've got some creepy Craigslist horror, literary fiction told entirely through letters, podcast mysteries, unhinged house hunting, toxic lesbian vampires, and an 81-year-old woman who may or may not be a murderer. We had it all. As always, this wrap-up will be spoiler-free. I will give you a synopsis of the story as well as all of my thoughts. And of course, if you would rather watch the version where I get to the point a little bit quicker, that will be up and available over on my BookTok. So grab a coffee, tea, energy drink, or whatever it is that's getting you through the day, and let's talk about some books. The first book we have is The Caretaker by Marcus Kliewer. This story follows Macy Mullins, a young woman who is struggling financially and desperately searching for work to help keep both herself and her younger sister afloat, when suddenly she stumbles across this very bizarre Craigslist ad looking for a caretaker. The job itself almost seems too good to be true. 3 days work, excellent pay, and all she has to do is watch over this remote house surrounded by wilderness. Easy. Naturally, absolutely nothing about that sounds suspicious whatsoever. So Macy takes the job and upon arriving, very quickly realizes that something is incredibly wrong. She's given a set of extremely strange rules and rituals that she must follow. But as the days progress, she begins to realize these aren't just quirky house rules. They may be the only thing standing between humanity and something genuinely horrifying. Now, I was thoroughly excited for this one because I really enjoyed Marcus Kliewer's previous book, We Used to Live Here. And to be fair, that man can absolutely write atmosphere. This book is creepy, unsettling, eerie, and incredibly easy to fly through. I was invested almost immediately and terrified. One of my biggest issues though was the repetition. There were multiple points where essentially the same situation was playing out and eventually I felt like I could predict exactly how things were going to unfold. Even Macy's internal monologue started to feel a little bit repetitive after a while. Another issue I had and felt a little bit let down by though was the ending. One of the reasons I loved We Used to Live Here so much was that it's ambiguous in a way that really made me think. I finished that book and could not stop thinking about it. I was deep diving Reddit for days on end, just engrossing myself in all these different theories. This one, however, felt different. Instead of leaving me with fascinating questions, it left me feeling like there were simply things that just hadn't yet been explained. And for me, there's a huge difference between ambiguity and missing payoff. Overall, I still enjoyed the atmosphere and tension all throughout the story. I just needed a little bit more explanation and a little bit less repetition. The next book we read was The Correspondent by Virginia Evans. The Correspondent is a contemporary epistolary novel told entirely through letters, emails, and other forms of correspondence. In this story, we follow 73-year-old Sybil Van Antwerp, a woman who has spent much of her life making sense of the world and communicating through writing. And through these exchanges, we gradually piece together the story of Sybil's life. We learn about her relationships, her regrets, her successes, and the devastating losses that have shaped who she has become. From there, as messages from her past begin resurfacing, she's forced to confront old wounds, regrets, and the possibility of forgiveness. The biggest strength of this book is easily how unique it is. I love that it doesn't rely on a traditional plot. I ended up listening to the audiobook version of this one, and I will say having a full cast of narrators narrate each of the letters made the whole story feel so much more immersive. So I will say if you're someone who likes immersive reading, so like physically reading the book whilst also listening to it, I feel like this particular book is the perfect candidate for that experience. I think my slight struggle in this one, however, was with Sybil herself. I know this is probably going to be an unpopular opinion because so many people love and adore this book, but I just found her rather difficult to connect with. She just felt very cold and emotionally distant throughout much of the story. Normally, I absolutely love a good character-driven story. I honestly think they can be incredible, but in this one here, I never found myself fully attached to either the characters themselves or even the plot. So on that, it made it a little bit harder for me to connect overall, and I guess as a reader, there were times where I felt a little bit bored, I suppose. I don't know if that's the right word I'm looking for though. That said though, the ending did surprise me emotionally, and there definitely were moments that really did work. Overall, I didn't dislike this book by any means. I think it's such a fascinating and unique way to tell a story. There were just unfortunately a couple of components that fell a little bit flat for myself. The next book I read was This Story Might Save Your Life by Tiffany Crum. This story centers around Benny and Joy, who are best friends and co-hosts of an incredibly successful podcast that focuses on these unbelievable survival stories. However, when Benny arrives one morning to record an episode and finds both Joy and her husband missing, everything spirals. The only clue left behind is an unfinished memoir Joy had been secretly writing, and as Benny searches for answers, buried secrets begin surfacing. This is a book I've been seeing everywhere as of late. It's another one I ended up listening to via audio, and I actually think that helped elevate the overall experience. Because the podcast element plays such a large role of the story, actually listening to those segments rather than reading them made it feel a lot more natural and immersive. The biggest strength for me was easily Benny and Joy themselves. Their friendship felt genuine, their banter was fantastic, and I really enjoyed learning about each of those characters through both timelines, as we do have a past and present timeline. I think one aspect that lowered my rating slightly is the story did feel a little bit slow and sluggish at times. So given everything I've said so far, it does make me wonder if had I read it physically instead of audio, would I still have the same rating overall? Another point is that the reveal felt a little bit too obvious. Now, this isn't to say it's going to be obvious for absolutely everyone who reads the book, but for myself, it was. And I think with that, and given everything else that had happened throughout the story, I guess I was just hoping for a little bit more of a shock factor, but that's okay. Still, the story blends mystery, thriller, romance, and friendship into a genuinely entertaining read. The next book we have is Mad Mabel by Sally Hepworth. Mad Mabel follows Elsie Mabel Fitzpatrick, an 81-year-old woman who lives a quiet life. To most people, Elsie is simply the grumpy, elderly neighbour who knows everyone's business and isn't afraid to share her opinions. But beneath that exterior lies a secret she spent decades trying to keep hidden. When a curious 7-year-old girl named Persephone moves into the neighbourhood and enters Elsie's life, the carefully controlled life she's built slowly begins to unravel. At the same time, a true crime podcast begins investigating and digging into events from the past, and from there, long-buried truths begin resurfacing. The story alternates between present-day Elsie and her childhood decades earlier, gradually revealing what really happened and whether the story that the world believes is the truth. This was actually my very first Sally Hepworth book, and I can tell you now, it will not be my last. I loved these characters. The relationship between Elsie and Persephone absolutely stole the show for me. Their dynamic brought so much humour, heart, and emotion to the overall story. The mystery itself is excellent, but what really surprised me is how moving this story became. I expected suspense and mystery, and I can tell you now, it absolutely delivered on that front. But I did not expect to be emotionally invested. The dual timelines worked beautifully, gradually revealing the truth piece by piece, and by the end, I felt incredibly satisfied. I've currently given this book a 4.5-star rating. I don't know if it's quite there at a 5-star, but that's where I'm at the moment. It might still slightly increase, but we'll see. All I know is I really, really loved it. The next book we read was Best Offer Wins by Marisa Kashino. This story follows Margot, a woman who has spent the last 18 months unsuccessfully trying to buy a home in an incredibly competitive housing market. Sounds a lot like real life, doesn't it? After losing 11 separate bidding wars, Margot is exhausted. She's frustrated and increasingly convinced that her life cannot move forward until she finally secures a home. Suddenly, she learns about a dream property that's expected to hit the market in approximately a month's time. Determined to get ahead of the competition, Margot begins taking increasingly questionable steps to ensure she gets the house before anyone else even has a chance. When I say she becomes obsessed with securing this dream home, I mean obsessed. As Margot becomes more and more fixated on securing this property, the story transforms into this darkly comedic examination of ambition, class pressures, desperation, and the lengths people will go to in pursuit of the life they think they deserve. This book was ridiculous in the best way possible. It's darkly funny, incredibly entertaining, and features the kind of main character where you're constantly thinking, girl, what are you doing? But you're still weirdly rooting for her anyway. The premise also feels surprisingly relevant given how brutal the housing market is right now. I mean, obviously, most people don't respond to losing a house by spiraling into complete and utter chaos, doing the things that Margot begins doing. Most people. I think the pacing was fantastic though. I was constantly hooked, intrigued, and on the edge of my seat, but I will say in comparison to the rest of the story, the ending did feel a little bit rushed. And following that, there were a couple of loose threads I wish had been explored a little bit further, but that's okay. There was also a side character in the story that I was fully expecting to pop back up at some stage, but they never did. So again, that kind of felt like another little loose thread. I don't know. Overall though, I still had a really, really good time with this one. It's unhinged and definitely not the kind of story you take too seriously, but still a great time. And the last book I read for the month of May was Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil by V.E. Schwab. Spanning nearly 5 centuries, this story follows 3 women whose lives become connected through immortality, love, rage, and hunger. In 1532 Spain, Maria dreams of escaping the limitations society has placed upon her. When a mysterious woman offers her an alternative path, Maria makes a decision that will alter the course of her life forever. In 1827 London, Charlotte is living a sheltered existence under the watchful eye of her family. After a forbidden romantic encounter threatens her future, she finds herself drawn toward a captivating widow whose offer of freedom comes with a dangerous price. And in 2019 Boston, Alice is trying to reinvent herself after moving across the world for university. Following a seemingly ordinary one-night stand, she becomes entangled in this chain of events that forces her to confront questions about identity, revenge, and her own future. As the story unfolds, the connection between these 3 women slowly emerges. It weaves together a story that explores love, loneliness, power, rage, freedom, and what it truly means to live forever. Toxic lesbian vampires. That's probably the quicker synopsis. Alright, firstly, V.E. Schwab's writing is just ridiculous in the best way possible. That woman could probably write about watching paint dry and I would still be invested. It would still be the most utterly atmospheric book, I just know it. No, but the way V.E. Schwab writes characters, atmosphere, and builds worlds is truly exceptional. With all that said though, although the writing itself was beautiful, the first half of the story was definitely slow. I love a good slow burn, please don't get me wrong, and I know they can be incredibly important when it comes to building a world, getting to understanding the characters, but I just found there were quite a few moments where I was kind of just wanting things to hurry along a little bit more. I don't know, it just felt a little bit stagnant from time to time. That second half, however, completely won me back. The pacing picked up dramatically and I do think everything came together beautifully by the end. I also really enjoyed learning about each of our main characters. Their backstory, who they are now, but I will say it did feel like Alice's storyline was noticeably weaker than our other 2 protagonists. So I think I would have loved just a little bit more from her arc because I was so curious about her character. I just feel like we needed a little bit more in comparison, but that's okay. Still though, the themes of freedom, desire, grief, and womanhood were incredibly well explored. So not my favourite book by V.E. Schwab, I still enjoyed it as a whole, but there were definitely a few elements that brought down my overall rating. And that wraps up all of the books that I read throughout the month of May. Overall, I think Mad Mabel was definitely my standout read for the month, with Best Offer Wins probably being the most surprising and weirdly fun. And just before we wrap everything up, let's quickly go through the books that are on my June TBR/hopefuls. Now, as of the time I'm filming this, I have already read a couple of the books I'm about to talk about, but you're just going to have to wait until the end of the month for my thoughts. I'm sorry. The first book on my list is Dissection of a Murder by Jo Murray, which is a bit of a psychological legal thriller. I have been seeing this book absolutely everywhere as of late, so I'd like to read it for myself. We all know Frida McFadden's come out with a new book, so of course I have to read it, and that one there is The Divorce. Look, I never go into Frida's books with the highest expectations. I just know they're going to be a little bit more of a popcorn thriller. You don't take it too seriously, and usually you can read them in like 1 or 2 sittings, and I think they're good as well if you're a bit stuck in a reading slump. I don't know, I'm just going off on tangents at this point. Anytime she releases a new book, without fail, I'm reading it. The next book on this list is The Poet Empress by Shen Tao. I have been so beyond desperate to start this book, so if this is not read by the end of June, sue me. I don't know what for, but just sue me. Truly, I don't think I have seen a single negative review on this book. Not that I go out of my way looking for any negative reviews, but everything I've heard so far has just been so incredibly positive, so I'm really, really looking forward to this one. Of course, I don't want to go in with high expectations, but I have a really good feeling. I hope so, at least. After being shafted from my TBR countless times, we're finally adding on Unwanted by Mia Sheridan. This is another one I'm really hoping I read by the end of this month, because I'm just going to feel terrible if I don't. Romantic suspense. Love a good romance, love a good suspense. The next book we have is The Children by Melissa Albert. Now, from what I understand, it's a bit of like a dark, somewhat fantasy, gothic with fairy tale elements and a little bit of horror. I've said this already about this book on other platforms, but when I say horror, I really hope it is just a tiny little bit, because I am a child. I would still sleep with a nightlight on it if I could. I mean, nothing's stopping me, I could. Premise, though, does sound very, very interesting, so regardless of whether it's going to give me nightmares, I'm excited, I think. I have no idea. Another book I've been hearing a lot about and really want to jump in to give my own thoughts is Buckeye by Patrick Ryan. Similarly to The Poet Empress, this is another book I don't actually think I've really seen any negative reviews on. I mean, I'm sure there probably are some out there, but I haven't really seen any myself. So I'm looking forward to jumping in and giving it my own thoughts. If I remember correctly, I do think this was also on my May TBR and I didn't quite get around to it. So I really did want to add it back to the list for this month because I do actually want to read it. If there's one book I have to read this month, I mean, it's The Poet Empress, no, but if there is another book I have to read this month, it's The Burning God by R.F. Kuang. We need to finish this series off. This is the final book to the Poppy War trilogy. It's been long enough and I feel like I'm finally emotionally ready for this one. I've been told to make sure I have tissues, blankets, snacks, everything on the handy, so I'll make sure I do. The next book on my hopefuls list is Our Infinite Fates by Laura Stephen. Now, this is one I have definitely seen a few mixed reviews on, so I'm very curious to jump in and again, give it my own thoughts. The premise does sound very, very good. It does remind me in ways of The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, and I loved that book. So I'm really, really hoping to love this one, but at the same time, I'm trying not to go in with incredibly high expectations. So far, I wouldn't know. I haven't started this book. So far, it seems all right. I started it last night. And the last book we currently have on my June TBR is The Last Poem by Courtney Pepperell. I know a lot of this book centers around grief and just, I guess, how it isn't linear. Everyone has their own journeys, their own experiences with it. So I feel like it's going to be a rather moving, emotional story, but another one I am very much looking forward to. I haven't actually really heard a lot about this book either. So if you have read it, definitely let me know. But anyways, that brings us to the end of today's video. Definitely let me know if you yourself have read any of the books that I spoke about, whether that be the ones in my May reading wrap up or my June TBR hopefuls. And as always, thank you all so much for watching. I will see you all in the next video. Oh no, you're fine. I have my microphone attached anyways, so. Who forgot to flush the toilet after taking a shit? Was fucking one of yous. And the lengths people will go to in pursuit of the life they think they deserve. Oh, finally! No, but the way V. Ishrob writes, no, but the way V. Ishrob, so if you have read it, definitely let me know.
I've read it already myself.
I will see you all in the next video. Dinner time.